Back21237, back with another review. Now, as I said recently in one of my last videos, that I had yet another major horror franchise that I haven't gone through yet as far as reviews. I've done the original film and I believe the remake in a video where I compare the two, but I have not yet gone through all the sequels. And I've been wondering since I started this channel, when should I do that? And I figured, why not now? And of course, that is A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I will be wearing this shirt throughout the remainder of the series. I do have a couple Freddy's NECA that I bought in like a huge box bundle of a bunch of these. And this is the one from the film for this video. And it is the first sequel. Might as well start right at the beginning this time, unlike my Chucky reviews, with A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, I would like to have the DVDs that have the original artwork on them, because I always thought the original artwork was really cool. But I got this DVD set back in, I think, Christmas 2003, when I was like 12 years old. So, I've had these for a long time. And right off the bat, I do want to say, just as a heads up for this series of reviews, I love the original film. I like this film quite a bit, actually. Love Dream Warriors. Wes Craven's New Nightmare, I think, is better than the rest of them. Not the biggest fan of the rest of the series. I'm not the biggest fan of Nightmare on Elm Street as a franchise. I'm not even the biggest fan of Freddy that much outside of the original film and 3. I mean, I definitely respect him as a horror icon. Just, I've always been more of a Jason or Michael or even Chucky type guy myself. But I know people will probably take my horror fan card away for that, but that's just how it is. So this film, Elm Street 2, the very first sequel, came out in 1985, just the following year of the original film. Directed by Jack Sholder, who wrote and directed Alone in the Dark, which is, I wouldn't say it's an underrated slasher, because slasher fans really like it, but it's an underrated 80s horror flick. And Jack Sholder is known for not liking horror films, but he did Alone in the Dark and this. Written by David Chaskin. Of course, produced by Robert Shea of New Line, who would produce all the films. I think have a cameo in all of them. I know he does in this one as a S&M bar bartender. Stars Mark Patton, Kim Myers, Robert Russler, Clu Gulager, who's been in a number of 80s horror films. I mean, he was in Return of the Living Dead, From a Whisper to a Scream, been in all kinds of films. Hope Lange and Robert Englund, of course, as Freddy Krueger. Jacques Haitkin did the cinematography, and Christopher Young did the music. And released in the fall of '85. Made for $3 million, made $30 million, so it was still a hit. But when this first came out, it got very mixed reviews. It has since been reassessed and praised, which, yes, this movie does break a lot of rules as far as Freddy and just the lore, the mythology, and the rule book established in the first film. This movie does break all of them. In fact, this almost feels like Freddy fan fiction than it does an actual sequel. But apart from that, yes, this was criticized for being sort of a Nightmare on Gay Street. This was known for being the gayest horror sequel, the gayest horror movie. It still is. If you look it up, you'll find it like that. Which is one of the reasons why it was heavily criticized when it was released, but is why it's been sort of re-evaluated and somewhat praised for using sort of repressed sexuality as a metaphor for Freddy. Which I would say, if you could take this film out of Elm Street, or out of the franchise, or just isolate it by itself, it is kind of a good commentary on sort of what a closeted or a person with repressed sexuality might feel. I can't speak from experience, but I can't say it's well executed because, I mean, the uh, self approval and self acceptance is not the moral of the story. Freddy is defeated with heterosexual love, so I'm not sure what they were going for. And it's iconic, or not iconic, but famous because the writer, David Chaskin, who's also gay, he spent decades, and so did the producers and the director, saying we had no idea what we were doing. We did not see any of the gay overtones or subtext, as Chaskin liked to say it. We didn't see any of it. It went over our heads. Then I think finally in 2010, Chaskin came out and said, yeah, it was all done on purpose. It was supposed to be subtext, but it ended up being very, very heavy. Originally, they wanted Craven to come back as director, but he totally disliked the script. He thought it was overly silly. He hated the idea of Freddy being able to come out into the real world. Not only come out into the real world, but start killing all these kids at a party that are much larger than him. Thought it really diminished the intimidation and fearfulness of Freddy. Also, the rule that he can come into the real world whenever he wants. Also, just scenes with like the way the coach was killed, the way the exploding parakeet he thought was very silly. Yeah, that happens. And they didn't want to use Robert Englund. They were just going to get a guy in a rubber mask to save money, and they realized he looked very stupid. The only shot that's in the film is Coach Snyder's death in the shower in silhouette obscured by steam. And that was one of the first things they shot as far as Freddy goes, and they realized it looked stupid, so they went out and they got Robert Englund. Now, originally, they were going to have this idea about possession. This new family was going to move in. The mother was going to be pregnant. And Freddy was going to possess the fetus. But one of the executive producers was pregnant at the time. So they decided not to go with that and go with David Chaskin's idea, which still deals with sort of possession and taking control of someone. But the whole unborn baby thing being affected by Freddy would go on to be in the fifth film, which I always forget what that movie is like. It's one of my least favorites. Almost 10 minutes in. This is one of the sequels that I really do enjoy. It's one of the first ones I saw. I remember seeing it on cable. I still enjoy it. Like, yes, I do have the same flaws and issues that everyone else has with it. Of it being a rule breaker and not being a very strong sequel or carrying over anything from the original. Other than it taking place in Nancy's house. They find Nancy's diary with a little bit of a mention of Nancy. That's the only connective tissue to the original film. Otherwise, it feels almost like, if it were DC, it would be like an Elseworlds or Black Label story. Completely separate, which if you are able to separate it, I do think it works. I do think that the metaphor works, which, why would I like a metaphor in this film but not a metaphor of the same kind in like a modern film? Probably because modern films, it feels like the agenda's being pushed. Here it just feels like one person's struggle, which is not very well resolved at the end, but the tone is definitely closer to the original. Freddy is still dark, he's still sinister, he's still menacing until he's at the party scene, which is what this figure's from. Where knives actually come out of his fingers, and he does the "You're all my children now." Although this figure also has the brain showing. You've got the body, I've got the brain. But to me, Freddy is still dark. He's still sinister. He's still mostly obscured by shadow. He's not quite the Looney Tune that he'll become by part 6. Yeah, don't believe me, wait till I get there. And yeah, he's still a scary character, which I love and appreciate. I would even say he's probably more evil in this one than some of the others, but in a very different way. There's even some scenes where he's got like these piercing red eyes. This one is very different because Mark Patton as Jesse, he's the only one that has these dreams. It's not like it's affecting all these other kids. It's just Jesse who lives in the 1428 Elm Street house. Now, the thing about Mark Patton is he was actually going through some repressed homosexuality at the time this was made. So the performance is somewhat autobiographical for him. I do know he held a grudge against the writers and or director and producers for feeling like he's being outed for some of the lines he has to say and the way he has to act. But now, and for a while, he did not like this film. Now he embraces it. You watch the 4-hour documentary, Never Sleep Again. He fully embraces this film. And sort of its legacy on the LGBTQ community. He even mentions that there's like this gay bar or nightclub that plays his very embarrassing dance scene on like a loop 24/7. Which, yeah, that dance scene is one thing. How did they not know what they were going for? And the death of Coach Snyder and some of the lines. It's very heavy. There's no way they didn't know, but in my opinion, it fits with the story. It's just not a very good Elm Street story. But the tone is still dark. Freddy is still dark. It's just more about possessing someone through dreams until the person is weak enough for Freddy to literally come out of. And yeah, there's some very silly things like the house being so hot, like the boiler room, that a parakeet explodes. Or even things in the real world, like a toaster exploding. Jesse kind of sleepwalking. And I want to get the name of Coach Snyder. He played Will Wheaton's dad in Stand By Me. But Marshall Bell, he was also in Total Recall. Now, he plays the gym coach who likes to abuse Jesse and his friend Grady, played by Rob Ressler, who would be in movies like Weird Science and Vamp. And Jesse ends up one night after waking up from a nightmare at this S&M bar where Coach Snyder is. Coach Snyder catches him. It is one of my biggest pet peeves in movies. Like, one of the guys from Chopping Mall does this. Smacking gum, like open mouth, smacking gum. It's annoying as hell. But he brings Jesse back to the school, makes him do laps and hit the showers. And Coach Snyder, all the balls start flying off the shelf, jump rope, grabs him by the wrist, pulls him into the showers, strips him, towel whips his ass, and then just claws down him. And then Jesse screams like a girl. Brought home by the police. And Kim Myers plays Lisa, who's his love interest. And probably my favorite girl of all the Elm Street films. I always thought she was the prettiest. Not the most resourceful or the strongest, but And she might not be as strong an actress, but she does look a lot like a young Meryl Streep. And just as the movie goes on and Freddy gets stronger, Jesse gets weaker, it all comes to a head at this pool party where Jesse and Lisa start to make out. Freddy's tongue comes out of his mouth and he acts shocked and leaves. So he stops making out with his girlfriend to go to his best friend's house, his best friend that he fights with, Grady. And he has dialogue like, there's someone trying to get inside me, and, you know, there's something trying to come out. Just definitely playing with the metaphor, the subtext. Very subtle subtext. So they do the thing where Jesse sleeps, Grady watches him. And it is a cool effect. There are some cool practical effects in this where, you know, Freddy breaks through Jesse. First we see his eye in like the back of his throat, but then he comes through his chest. And yeah, some of the effects, like as Freddy's coming through the chest, you kind of see an animatronic Jesse going like this. Kind of reminiscent of the, can't remember the character's name, when the head rips off in John Carpenter's The Thing. But yeah, becomes Freddy, goes back to the pool party, kind of taunts Lisa a little bit, and then just starts slaying kids all over the place at this pool party, while still maintaining his supernatural powers, like the pool getting super hot, the fence being super hot or electrical, slashing kids who, yes, are bigger than Robert Englund. And then he does the, "You're all my children now." And then it ends sort of at the plant. We find out Freddy worked at the plant. That's where he was killed, where he brought the kids. There are these hell dogs that look like Rottweilers with like baby doll face masks that Lisa has to go up against. And this is one of the lamest climaxes of how to defeat Freddy. And it really does go against the whole metaphor. Which, she's able to stop him by saying, you know, "Jesse, I love you. I love you. Fight him. You're stronger than him. He's weak. I love you, Jesse. I love you." And yeah, that weakens Freddy. And then she kisses him. Freddy melts. And then, like the hell dogs in Ghostbusters, he takes the charred bits off of him. And he's fine. So, even it's not a repressed homosexuality story where it's about self-acceptance, because heterosexual romance is what saves him at the end and what conquers Freddy. So, not quite sure what they were going for with that. And then it has sort of the same fake out as the first movie, which it ends with the dream and ambiguous as to who dies. But this movie opened up with Jesse's nightmare on a school bus where the driver's played by Robert Englund with no makeup. And it ends on the school bus with Lisa's friend having Freddy's glove come out of her chest. And then we just see the bus roll back down to the desert. But yeah, that's Freddy's Revenge. There's not too much to say about it. It is kind of the forgotten sequel. It's one people talk about the least. Maybe it is because it's not as goofy and hated as 5 and 6. It's not as great or iconic as 1 and 3. And it is very different. I mean, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is also extremely different, but still feels like a Freddy film. This one is just so different and breaks all the rules, and a totally different feel. I mean, there is a way to abide by the Elm Street Freddy rules, but still sort of have it be this possession story, and they just weren't able to go with it. And for all its flaws, for me personally, the tone of the film, the tone of Freddy, is kind of what does make it one of my more favorite ones of the series. However, the only thing I haven't talked about is Freddy himself, other than being sinister and dark still. He doesn't really have a lot to do. Up until the pool party, and other than the, like, you've got the body, I've got the brain, all he really does is stand there and laugh. And just kind of stand there and be like a creepy apparition, or just like a stand there and look creepy. He doesn't have a whole lot to do. Robert Englund doesn't really get to lick his chops very much in this role. He will in part 3, definitely, but yeah, Freddy isn't really granted a lot, and yeah, it is a very lame way that he's killed, but this has always been one of my more favorite sequels. I do need to freshen up on 4. Maybe 4 would bump this out of the top 3. Maybe I liked New Nightmare more than this. I don't remember, but 1 and 3 were always my top 2. And part 2 has always kind of hovered between 3 and 5. It is mostly just because of the tone and how they treat Freddy, tone-wise. But yeah, I have all the same flaws that everyone else has. Maybe just where I'm not as big as a franchise fan as most people. I accept it more. I'm not sure. But so yeah, that's the beginning of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise series of reviews. So stay tuned for the rest, and thank you for watching.